This is Michael Woodward, and this is episode 90 of the Jumble Think podcast.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Jumble Think podcast, a podcast focused on telling the stories of dreamers, makers, innovators, and influencers. Along the way, we give you some tips and ideas of how you can chase your own big ideas and dreams and create the world you want to live in. Our guest on today's episode is Tim Fulton. More about Tim in a moment. Our guest on Wednesday's episode is Bud Torkum. He is the CEO and co-founder of Mazama Media, and they specialize in social media strategy. In the episode, Bud shares his insights into digital marketing and social media, what it's like to be on Facebook's Small Business Council, and then we also talk about building the right teams for your company. Make sure to check out this episode with Bud Torkum on Wednesday. It is so hard to believe that the Jumble Think podcast is 90 episodes in, and it's been a lot of fun. We've had amazing guests. If you're new to the podcast, or maybe you just have skipped over some, right now is a great time to go back and check out some of our guests. Listening to the Jumble Think podcast is super easy. You can swing on over to jumblethink.com and check out the podcast page, or you can check out your favorite place, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, or even SoundCloud. And you can subscribe to the podcast so that you can check out old episodes and make sure to catch the new episodes when they release. Swing on over to jumblethink.com/podcast to check out and learn more. Now let's jump into today's episode with Tim Fulton. Hey there, welcome to the Jumble Think podcast. My name's Michael Woodward. I'm the host of the Jumble Think podcast. Super excited to have you along for our amazing guest today. Our guest today is Tim Fulton. He is a leader in small business coaching and development, nationally recognized as a small business consultant advocate with more than 30 years of experience. In the past, he served as an assistant director of the SBDC at Clayton State University. He's also served as the director of the Family Business Institute at Florida International University. He's recently written 2 books called Small Business Matters and his second book called Small Business Matters and All That Jazz. Beyond his coaching and consulting and his books and all the cool stuff he's doing, he's also a sought-after speaker, speaking for organizations like the Association of Small Business Development Centers, Cruise Line Industry Association, and the American Society for Training and Development. This is going to be a lot of fun, so let's jump into the conversation with Tim Fulton. Tim, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks for taking time out to chat with us today. How are you doing?
Very welcome, Michael. I'm thrilled to be with you. It's a beautiful Friday morning here in Atlanta.
Oh, Atlanta's got to be beautiful this time of year.
It is. It's a little cooler, and we're getting the change in colors. It's beautiful outside.
That's great. I am excited to talk to you for many reasons, but one of them is that a couple of years ago, I was involved in the SBDC as a consultant, and I know that you have a past with them too. Tell us about the SBDC and your work there.
Sure. I worked for the Small Business Development Center here in Atlanta. This would be going back almost 20 years ago. Prior to that, I had been a serial entrepreneur, had owned and operated a variety of small businesses of my own. And then I decided I wanted to move to the next step, which was helping other small business owners. And I got connected to the SBDC, and I thought, wow, what a great job to be able to help other people start and grow their businesses. And so I joined the SBDC here, and I worked with them for about a year and a half, and maybe one of the best jobs I ever had, just being able to help hundreds of small business owners get started and then help them grow their business enterprises.
And it's a fun program for really helping out people that need help and sometimes don't know the way to get started, get going, and it's a great program for that.
And Michael, if I could share just a funny story, almost 6 months ago, I was doing a training program here in Atlanta. And at the first break, a very nice lady came up to me and said, "Do you remember me?" which is always a scary question, from a total stranger.
Yeah.
And I said, I am so sorry. But I don't remember you. And she said, 15 years ago, you did a workshop at the Small Business Development Center about how to start a business. And she said, if it had not been for that workshop and a book that you recommended, a book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber,
Yeah.
she said, I would not be in business today.
Wow.
And I was so humbled by that. But I think it's something that for people that work in the SBDC, they probably hear quite often because they provide such a great service.
Yeah, it's true. I know that I haven't been involved for a couple years now since we moved back to the East Coast, and I still get emails from time to time. Hey, just wanted to let you know how things are going, and it's so encouraging to hear those stories of success and people who are taking that jump of faith and starting something awesome, which is, I think, what it's all about, is helping people realize their dreams and ideas and that they're possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
You've moved on years ago into doing what you did before with SBDC and doing it at a much larger scale with small business coaching and development. Tell us about that transition. And you started your business back in 94?
My consulting practice, correct.
Yeah.
Small Business Matters.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about small businesses, why you love them so much, and how you help them.
Yeah, it's interesting, Michael, that I like maybe many consultants, I kind of fell into it. I'd had businesses of my own, and I had sold off the last one, and I've just found people, would come to me and ask a question. They'd ask for a little advice. They would have me come speak maybe, and the next thing I know, I was getting paid to speak and to coach and to train others. And it evolved into a consulting practice, Small Business Matters. And I feel like I'm the luckiest guy on the planet that I get to work with really smart, growth-minded individuals, young and old, who are interested in going out on their own and creating jobs and being innovative. And I get to watch and guide and poke at them every once in a while, and I can't imagine having a more interesting job.
You mentioned that you were an entrepreneur yourself. What did that look like for you, and what kind of lessons did you learn through your journey of being an entrepreneur, starting things and doing the daily job of creating a business?
Well, that's a good question. And I was clueless. I came out of business school. I went to school in New Orleans at Tulane. I got an MBA. I was the only person I know of in my graduating class that did not go to Wall Street, didn't go to work for a bank. I thought, why? Why would anyone want to go work for some big company when I could work for myself? So I got involved. It was a family business. It was a tire and automotive business, like a Goodyear store, so to say. And they threw me in as a store manager, and I had no experience. I didn't know tires. I didn't know how to run a business, but I made hundreds of mistakes, I'm sure. But I enjoyed it, and it's what I wanted to do, and I learned on the job. And after a while, I can't say it got easier, but I think I got better at it. And I found that's exactly what I wanted to be doing is helping other people achieve their dreams and growing an enterprise and creating a couple jobs here and there. And so it worked out well, but it certainly was not easy starting off.
We hear so much about everyone needs to go get a degree, whether it's working or going to get your bachelor's or your master's or whatever that looks like. How did the education prepare you for business, or did you find that the education that you got gave you some preparation, but not the realities of what small business really looks like?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, I was afforded a great education at Tulane, and I learned the basics. I learned to read financial statements, and I learned a little bit about marketing and from an academic point of view and organizational behavior. So I got some good learnings that I think helped me in that first job. I also learned a little bit about resilience and overcoming obstacles and challenges, which are certainly an integral part of success in small business today. and working in teams and working, collaborating with others. So I think in many ways it did help me prepare. But I'll tell you, when you get thrown into that business and all of a sudden you're having to make payroll and dealing with customers and having to make sure there's money in the bank every week, those are things that no education can prepare you for, I don't think.
I want to lay a little bit of a foundation as we move into the interview a little bit further. And the first question I have to kind of lay that foundation is, when you talk about small business, what does that actually look like? What does that mean?
Yeah, I get asked that because I think there's some confusion around that. I think the federal government defines small businesses up to about not a million, $100 million in revenue. Um, when I think of small businesses, I tend to think of maybe 20 or 30 million in annual revenue or less. But I think the federal government defines it a little larger, both in terms of revenue and in terms of number of employees as well.
Our podcast is based on helping people with big ideas and dreams that maybe want to be that entrepreneur, that want to jump into the world of business or chase that dream and stop living their safe life that's not fulfilling them and start finding a thing to do that they're passionate about. There is a lot of perception on what being a business owner looks like, what it means to be an entrepreneur. Can you maybe dispel some of the myths and give us some of the realities of that person that hasn't experienced being a business owner, what it's really like, and the realities that they need to be aware of?
Oh, I'd be happy to, because I run into this quite often with clients. Some of the what they think is involved in success in a small business and the reality, and one of them I find with startups is so many startups, we tend to think the people who start businesses are the people that you just described, the visionaries, the innovators, the people with big ideas. And yet the reality is that most small businesses are not started, by entrepreneurs. They're started by technicians. A technician is someone who has a particular skill and experience. The chef in a restaurant, the plumber, who decides to start his own plumbing business, the doctor who starts a medical practice. Those are technicians, and that's who starts over 90% of all small businesses. And as a result, we have a large failure rate in this country with small businesses. And I think fatal assumption when they get into their business is they assume that if I'm the chef, if I've been preparing food all forbid, I should be able to run a restaurant. And yet restaurants have one of the highest failure rates of all small businesses, primarily because I think they're started by chefs.
Yeah.
And they just assume because they know how to prepare food that they can be wildly successful running a restaurant. And yet there is, as you know, there's so much more to success in business aside from the technical part of the business. It's, finding good people and finding a competitive advantage and making sure the business has proper capital. And the technical part of the business almost becomes secondary if we're not capable of executing on those other key areas. And I think that's what leads to most small business failure, is the fact that the technicians start the business and don't realize how important those other areas of the business are. So that's one certain myth that I find so often about who starts most small businesses.
I'm a big fan of the Strength Finders tool, and what you're talking about here is really the foundation of building the right team and having the team members on there to support an idea or dream, or if you're that plumber coming into the world of plumbing, how can we start seeing our blind spots as entrepreneurs? Because so often we get into the weeds, we get into either, if you're a client-based company doing services, we're so focused on the services that we forget the business, or maybe we're focused on the business and we don't have this well-rounded business that's seeing the full picture. As business owners, as entrepreneurs, how can we really start seeing that full picture, seeing the fullness of what we need to be doing so that we can create businesses that are sustainable?
That's a great question. And a couple of things come to mind, Michael. One is, I think, for business to be successful, not only they need two people at the top of the business. Number one, they need that visionary, the innovator, the disruptor, the person with the big idea, capable of making big decisions. But secondly, they also need what's referred to as an integrator. And the integrator is the person who makes things happen,
Yeah.
who executes, who on a day-to-day basis oversees the operations of the business. And so often, the business is maybe started by the visionary, but they're just not good at the day-to-day stuff. And so sooner than later, they need to be able to find this integrator, because that's that integrator who also is going to challenge the thinking of the visionary, who's going to say, hey, let's slow down for a minute. Let's make sure we've got proper capital to execute on that big plan that you've got. So it's those two personalities that if we get the right people, they can work beautifully together. But if the visionary goes too long without that integrator, he or she can open themselves up to catastrophic mistakes. So that's one answer to your question. The second answer is, I think sooner than later, the founder, the owner of the company needs to surround themselves with some form of advisory board, whether it's just a kind of a kitchen cabinet, a couple friends get together on a regular basis, or peers, other business owners, or they get involved I'm involved with Vistage, which is an international peer group, or it could be an industry group, a chamber of commerce, but getting around peers and just looking for best practices, looking to check their ideas with people who are like-minded, I think can be extremely valuable.
That's really, really good. You've written 2 books about this, Small Business Matters and Small Business Matters and all that jazz. Tell us about those books, and as a small business owner, how they're going to help you, how they're going to refocus maybe your understanding of business and give you some blueprints for the future.
Sure. I've been writing a newsletter for small business owners called Small Business Matters for almost 20 years. And each month I publish the newsletter and I write an article. And the books essentially were just a compilation of those articles. Each book, I just took articles that I'd written and had shared and put those into both Small Business Matters and then most recently Small Business Matters and all that jazz. And the articles are many of them are based on my experience in working over time with hundreds, thousands of business owners and seeing what's working in terms of, best practices and seeing the mistakes they make and my own mistakes and writing about those and then, sharing those with my clients. And it's just been a joy to be able to publish both the articles and the books. And I just get a kick when I'll bump into someone and they'll say, hey, I read this chapter in the book about hiring and boy, you've made things a lot easier for me.
Wow.
That's the best. That's as good as it gets.
You talk about the 6 roles of small business leaders. What are their roles and how do they help a business succeed?
I think one of the most difficult parts of being the business operator is that, we do have to wear different hats at different times of the day. And some of those hats, those roles, we may be more comfortable with, we may be more prepared for, some we may not. So, one of them is the talent. You're the chief talent officer within the company. You're responsible at the highest level for, as Jim Collins tells us in Good to Great, getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, right people in the right seats. And so as a chief talent officer, finding talent and in today's world, in a very tight labor market, that's a tough job. As a company is growing, finding the right people who fit into the organization and who can perform at the highest level. So I think maybe the most important role is that of chief talent officer. Michael, I also suggest that the business owner at the highest level is the chief scorekeeper, responsible for making sure that at the highest level that we're keeping score of our business.
Okay.
Are we winning? Are we losing? Are we achieving our revenue and profitability goals? Are we tracking key performance indicators? And if I may just share a quick story where this really hit home for me is one of my sons was playing high school baseball and I went to his game and the scoreboard was not functioning.
Okay.
And so as spectators, we had no idea during the course of the game what the score was. And that was the most frustrating sporting event I've ever attended, because
Yeah.
I'm so accustomed to always looking up at the scoreboard and saying, okay, who's winning? How many runs? What inning is it? And me and my colleagues, my parents at the game, we were clueless.
Yeah.
It occurred to me, I think that happens in many small businesses every day, that the players, the employees look up at a scoreboard and it's blank. They don't know, how the company's doing, how are we operating, are we hitting our key performance metrics? And I think that's a shame. So I think at the highest level, the business owner is responsible for making sure that we're keeping score and that we're sharing those numbers with our employees.
That's really, really good. I had a coach a couple years ago. He would always say, "What you measure grows." And I thought, as I hear you saying what you're saying, and I'm just like remembering him saying that measurement is such an important part of the process of growing a business, that you can't just hope it all works out, and that, when you go to the bank, that hopefully there's money, but you've got to have these metrics for measurement. And what you're saying just reminds me so much of what he would say, and such a powerful recommendation.
Thank you.
I think so often in business, we feel isolated as business owners. We feel like we're alone and there's no one else to really help us in the journey. I know I've been there with my own businesses where I might face a challenge and I just don't know where to turn or who to talk to. And isolation seems like the death march of a business owner in a lot of ways. Can you tell us about how a business owner could potentially overcome that obstacle? Because it's, one of the biggest issues that for me, when I was able to find some networks, find some communities, it was able to help me. But can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. That's a big issue I find that small business owners face is isolation. It is truly lonely at the top. I know I felt that when my business had issues, cash was tight, or I had a big decision, I couldn't necessarily turn to my employees and tell them that, hey, we're running low on cash.
Right.
I didn't want to go to my banker. My wife didn't want to hear about it. And so I had to internalize a lot of that. And so that's why I think it really is important that business owners have, a mentor, a coach that they can talk to, a peer group that they can be a part of, because it just to be able to talk about it, not even looking for answers, but just being able to talk out loud about a decision or an issue that I've got. Oftentimes I can think through it myself if I can just talk out loud to someone who's just a good listener, a sounding board. And that's a role that I play with many of my clients. I'm not a consultant. I don't try to fix anything, because I find many of my clients, they just need someone who's willing to listen,
right,
and ask a question here or there, and maybe provide some direction, because these are smart people running these companies, and they're strong-willed, and they've got lots of grit. And sometimes they just need a little bit of a nudge. And that's, I think, part of my role.
That's really cool. And I know for me, having that coach, that mentor, someone to turn to is such a powerful tool or ability to have in your business. Can you tell maybe one story of somebody that you've worked with and how you were able to give a different perspective and that shifted? Because I think that's one of the jobs of a coach or a mentor that a lot of people forget, is that it's that second pair of eyes to give different perspective. Can you share a little bit how perspective and changing your perspective and how a coach can help you through that process?
Well, one that comes to mind is, I try to help my clients figure out the why in their business. What is the purpose? What is the mission? Why does this business exist? And I had one of my clients, they do IT staffing for the military. They put technicians to help, to develop applications for the military. In some cases, they end up on bases in Iraq and Afghanistan, places that you and I maybe would not choose to want to go work. And so it's not easy work. And so that's why the mission, is so important. And he was struggling, and his mission statement was about a paragraph long. It had been written
Wow.
by a consultant, didn't really speak to why this company existed. And I asked Randall, the CEO of the company, I thought a pretty simple question. I said, Randall, if your technicians, if they were to make a mistake, what could result from a mistake? And he said, well, when we make mistakes, people die.
Wow.
And to me, that I sat in silence for a few moments. That was such a powerful statement. And I said, I think we've come up with your mission statement. And sure enough, his mission statement today is we save lives. Very
Yeah.
simple. We
Yeah.
save lives. And it's so simple and yet so powerful. And he was attracted to it right away. And he tells stories about when he shares it with his people, they just get blown away. And to me, I see something like that. And if I can help somebody in a simple way achieve a milestone like that, it goes a long ways.
Yeah, I love that because um, there's the old proverb that says, without vision, people perish. And there is this philosophy in business that's like, it's just business. But when we can transfer that with our team, with the people that we impact, our customers and our clients, and make it personal, make it have an impact, have that call to a mission or a purpose, there's so much power in that.
Yeah, and if I may just share one more
Yeah.
quick story, do you mind?
No, that'd be awesome. I love it.
One more quick story that comes to mind. I had a new client. His name was Charlie, and he owned a business, a real estate business of sort. And I asked him a question that I ask regularly. I asked him, so Charlie, tell me about your bucket list. What is it that you'd love to do before you die? And he had never heard of a bucket list.
Okay.
Was not familiar with the term. And so as I explained it to him, his eyes got kind of big. He said, you know what, give me a little bit of time on that. I've never thought about it, what I'd like to do before I die. And the next month I sit down with Charlie, and he had over 100 items
Wow.
on his bucket list
Wow.
of things that he had over time, he'd thought about these before. This was not the first time, but first time he really put together the list, and over 100 things that he decided he wanted to do before he died. And it was so cool to see somebody really give thought to that. And now, every year he knocks off 3 or 4 items.
That's so cool. And one of the things we're a big fan of, and we've talked about quite a bit, is the importance of writing it down and having these. There's something powerful about having that list and just checking it off that just unlocks kind of a release of like, oh, I've accomplished something awesome. So I love that story, just about how he has this bucket list now, and you're able to create a catalyst for him to think differently in that space.
Yeah, it's made a big difference in his life.
I think so often small businesses struggle. Every day they're struggling with something. And I think one of the problems that we encounter most is growth. How do we get over the hurdles of growth? How do we make our business so much, maybe have more revenue, or how do we change our expenses? You're a maverick in a lot of things I've read in the space of business growth and strategies. You have a lot of unique ideas, some great ideas, some really powerful ideas. Can you share maybe some common small business growth strategies that you think are go-to in the arsenal of tools that a small business owner can use to really take their business from where it is and maybe achieve their next goal, their next growth spurt?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. It's interesting. There's been a lot of research that's been done about business growth, and the fact that there are several just natural barriers to growth for small businesses, barriers that we don't anticipate, nobody told us about in business school. We're growing our business, and all of a sudden we hit like a ceiling, and it seems like no matter what we do, we can't get past that obstacle. And what they found is the first one shows up on average at about $1 million in revenue. So for a typical small business, that could be 3-5 years or so into the life of the business. And there's been nice growth, and all of a sudden the growth stalls, and it becomes very frustrating. Only about 4% of all small businesses ever get past $1 million in revenue.
Wow.
So it's kind of an elite club of sort if a business gets past $1 million. And what they have found, the research has shown that what causes that for most, what causes that stall growth is the business owner's unwillingness to let go,
Okay.
unwillingness to delegate, because up to this point they've been able to wear all the hats, right? They're
Yeah.
the CEO, the COO, the CMO, the CFO, the CIO. They're all the C's,
Yep.
and for a period of time they can do that and be successful. But at some point, that individual, that visionary, has to be willing to let go of some of those responsibilities. They've got to be willing to delegate and delegate effectively. And for some business owners, that is nearly impossible because they want to have their fingers on everything,
Yeah.
and they're unwilling to let go of that part of the business. And yet, if they're not able to do that, it's very hard to continue to scale that business. So that's one kind of barrier. And then if they get past that, good news is they can get past that if they're willing to let go. And then the second barrier that I see shows up usually at about $10 million in revenue, and only 0.4% of all small businesses ever get past $10 million in revenue. So that's even a
Wow.
smaller, more elite club.
Now, when you say revenue, are you talking annual revenue or the life cycle of the business?
Annual top line revenue.
Okay. All right.
Annual top line revenue. And so now we get somewhere up to 10 million. And once again, our growth stalls and we scratch our head and we can't figure out why we can't grow the company any further. And again, the research on this has indicated that usually the big issue at this point is the design of the business,
Okay.
or lack of design, I should say, because at this point, we've really not needed to come up with an operations manual. We don't have a lot of policies and procedures, not much in the way of systems, maybe a checklist or two, but not much, of that either. And we've been able to grow despite that. But at some point, if we're not willing to really knuckle down and install some bit of design into the business growth will stall.
Okay.
And I see this in many cases. Sometimes it's before the 10 million that the business gets so chaotic that it can't possibly grow anymore.
Okay.
And so these are the two big obstacles that I see. And the sooner the business owners recognize these and address these, the better off they'll be.
So it sounds like that first hurdle, that $1 million hurdle, it sounds like for that it does two things. Not only does it help to delegate so that the responsibilities are carried by multiple people, you have specialists in their spots so that they can help achieve the next spurt of growth in the business. But it also sounds like it removes a lot of the heartache and pain points, the stress of trying to do it on your own or trying to carry it all. And a lot of business owners struggle, like you said, with allowing other people, having faith in other people, releasing that space to do their job so that the CEO or the business owner can really step back and become that visionary or whatever their role is in the business. Mm-hmm. What are some steps that they can take to create good systems to overcome that hurdle, the fears of, I'm bringing in a controller to help manage the money, but I've got to hold on to the money, or I'm bringing in a project manager to manage our projects, or I'm bringing in a marketing specialist to do the marketing, but I'm afraid the message is going to get lost. Our DNA is going to get lost. What are some strategies that they could put in place so that they can alleviate the fears? Or is it that you just have to step in and just go, I can't do this, and I've just got to get over myself and move forward?
Yeah, too often it happens as a result of making a mistake or stress. But I mess up a marketing campaign. I get overdrawn at the bank, and I say, okay, I've got to bring in a controller. I've got to bring in a CFO. I've got to hire a marketing person because I don't know as much of this as I thought. So sometimes it's just a result of a mistake or hardship. Better is to try to anticipate my needs, anticipate when I need to bring in someone to head up marketing, anticipate when I need to bring in maybe an outsourced CFO. I interviewed recently the CEO of a company close to me here, a company called Savannah Bee Company, and the company was started by a beekeeper.
Wow.
And it's gone from zero to, I don't know, they're probably a $50 million company today, shipping honey products all over the world.
Wow.
And the CEO's name is Ted Denard, and he told me he said the best advice I ever got was to hire early.
Yeah.
Because so often we do the opposite. We wait and we wait and we wait. But he learned to anticipate his hiring and actually hire someone before he needed them and allow that person to grow into that position. But that is so hard for the entrepreneur to do that, but it's what creates success.
You mentioned hiring early. I've gone through that process, and I've hired well and I've hired poorly on people. It's an art of learning how to hire. It really is. There has been a massive shift from, warm bodies in a room employees to distributed teams to working with contractors. How can an employer or how can a business owner really approach staffing and find the right mix for them and what they do?
Michael, that's one of the biggest issues facing many of my clients today, with a very tight labor market. To try to find good talent and to retain that talent equally hard.
Yeah.
Because we're in a good economy, people are leaving companies much quicker now than they would have in a weaker economy. So it's not only finding the talent, but retaining that talent as well. And what I suggest is, and one of the mantras, so to speak, is hire the athlete, teach the sport.
Okay.
Hire the athlete, teach the sport and essentially what that says is look for someone or people who share your values, who share your ethics, who share your mindset. And then it's easier to teach those people the job than to try to find someone who is a great technician, but who may not share your values, who may not share your mindset, and try to teach them, your core values, because that's really hard, if not impossible.
Yeah.
So one is establishing, okay, what is it that we believe in? What are our core values? What are the 5 or so things that mean more to us than anything else? And then using those to then filter candidates, for the positions that we've got in our company, and find people who are a fit, find people who are aligned with our core values, with the idea that it's a lot easier to teach them the technical part of the business than to try to teach them, values.
Yeah.
And so that's what I suggest to my members, and it makes hiring more difficult, but I think it helps the retention rate stay higher than what you would find in most businesses. So that's probably the most important thing that I suggest to my clients is hire the athlete, teach the sport.
You've got some great resources. We mentioned your books. You have a blog. You have a great website. You have a really powerful newsletter. How can people find and connect with you so that they can get really moving forward in their business and taking it to that next level?
Yeah, I would invite your listeners to visit my website at smallbusinessmattersonline.com. Smallbusinessmattersonline.com. The variety of different resources available on my website. I also invite them to subscribe to my newsletter, Small Business Matters, and they can do that on my website. It's a free newsletter that goes out once a month. And then if they're really interested, they can also order one or both of the books on my website as well.
For that person who is starting out their journey, they're at the beginning of their business or they're just starting it, what is the one tip you would give them to say, I wish I would have known this on my own journey? Or working with business owners, this is the one tip that I think that every business owner needs to know before they really, get going in their business.
That's an interesting question. Starting and growing a small business is maybe the most difficult job on the planet, and it requires enormous patience and grit, as I mentioned before, and resilience. And so I think, Michael, what I would share would be, and something I alluded to earlier, is as early as possible figuring out what is the why behind your business. Why does this business exist? because those days when it's really hard and you're tempted to want to quit and throw in the towel, if there's not a strong purpose to this business, if you don't feel like this business is much more than what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, then it's easy to quit. It's easy to go find a job. But when there is a strong purpose, like um, uh, my client Randall, and we save lives. It's that mentality that helps business owners get over the tough days and the tough decisions, and know that their business is far more important than they might think on a day-to-day basis. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's very helpful. Let's dive into our rapid fire questions. These are questions I ask every guest on the podcast. The first question we may have already covered quite a bit, but I'll ask it anyway because we ask it on every episode. And that's, what is one tip you would give someone with a big idea or dream and they don't know where to start?
Well, you mentioned in the very beginning the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center. It's the best resource available to small businesses in the country, funded by the SBA and then local resources. These are consultants who, for no charge, will sit down with you, and they are trained to help you work through your business idea, ask tough questions. I know in some cases, in my case, I told people I thought this was crazy. And sometimes that's what people need to hear earlier than later. So the SBDC would be my first stop.
That's really good. What is one change you'd like to see in the world?
The best thing that happened, in my opinion, the best thing that happened to small business recently was the Affordable Care Act.
Okay.
And it's not gotten a lot of publicity, but small businesses, for the first time in the history of our country, were on the decline, up to starting in the last 10 years. And one of the reasons was people were afraid to leave their companies with pre-existing conditions and go start their own business, afraid they couldn't get health care. And so the Affordable Care Act was one of the biggest spurs to small business that we've had in a very long time. And so if I had a magic wand, it would be to ensure that, and call it whatever you want, but to make sure that people who want to start businesses can do so and not worry about pre-existing conditions, health conditions.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Oh, boy. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
That's always a tough one. My legacy would be, well, I've got two sons, and if one or both of them were able to get involved in entrepreneurship and enjoy anywhere near the happiness, that I've enjoyed, that would be great. And the other one would be, as I shared with you, and maybe 15 years from today, I bump into somebody and they ask me that same question, do you remember me? And maybe there's something that I shared, something that I put in front of them that helped them be successful in their business.
Who or what inspires you?
Well, who or what inspires me? The people that I work with, because they're the ones, I'm sitting in the stands. They're on the playing field, and they've got their helmet on, their shoulder pads, and they're missing blocks. They're getting tackled. They're fumbling every once in a while, but they're playing the game day in and day out. And I am so inspired by them that they're willing to risk, what they've got and put everything on the line. I am most inspired every day by the small business owner.
What are you currently reading or watching?
Currently reading. I've got a couple favorite authors. I love anything that Patrick Lencioni has written, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Death by Meeting. Anything, I mentioned Jim Collins. I love reading anything that he's published. Malcolm Gladwell, I enjoy reading because he just causes me to think really hard. And listening to one of my favorite podcasts is Freakonomics, because I love behavioral economics. And every time I listen, it just gives me a different perspective on the world.
That's a good podcast. I like that one too. I end every episode with this final question. What is one dream you're still wanting to fulfill in your own life?
Well, I'm thinking of my bucket list, and I've got all the normal stuff, travel and time with kids. I'm a big TED fan, TED Talks, TED Conference, and I would love to do a TED Talk. And I'm hoping in 2018 that's a bucket list item that I can mark off, but to not only do a TED Talk, but to do one that's meaningful and significant.
That's really cool. Tim, it is so It's been so much fun chatting with you and talking about an important topic that I think more people need to be aware of and the realities of small business. And your insights are really powerful. So thanks for sharing that with our listeners. I know that it's going to impact their lives.
Michael, this has been great. I appreciate being on Jumble Think, and you've got a great show. And maybe someday I'd love to come back.
That'd be awesome. Love to have you back. I want to thank today's guest, Tim Fulton, for taking time out to share his story. You can check him out at smallbusinessmattersonline.com, smallbusinessmattersonline.com, or you can swing on over to jumblethink.com and check out the links in the episode notes. On Wednesday, our guest is Bud Torkham. He is the CEO and co-founder of Mazama Media. His company specializes in social media and digital marketing. In the episode, he shares about being on the Facebook Small Business Council, testing ideas on social media, and making the workplace a really fun place to be. Make sure to check out our episode with Bud Torkham on Wednesday. We want to get the word out about the Jumble Think podcast. It's been a lot of fun to create this, and we want the world to know about it. If you love the Jumble Think podcast, we'd be honored if you would share it on your favorite social media platform. Let your friends, let your colleagues know how Jumble Think has impacted you. Leave us a review. We want to hear from you and know how the Jumble Think podcast has impacted your life. As we leave you for today's episode, I want to encourage you, get out there and do something, anything, to move one step closer to creating that big idea and dream and ultimately changing the world around you. Making that first step could be the launching pad into a reality that you could never imagine. Thanks for listening to the Jumble Think podcast. We look forward to having you back on our next episode on Wednesday.
Décontracté même en travaillant.